Hello, and welcome to episode 7 of Super Deep Movie Analysis. I'm Lec Zorn, joined by guest co-host Michelle Gussow, and in this episode, proving that time flies when you're having fun, we're already more than halfway through our preview of the upcoming Rocky sequel titled Creed. We're now up to Rocky 4, back from 1985, and this was the highest grossing movie of the series. It did 129 million in America, about 300 million worldwide. In fact, it was the highest. Grossing sporting movie of all time worldwide until just a few years ago. It was beaten by something in 2009. I don't remember what it was. I'll have to look that up again. But anyway, I always say that movies must be viewed in the context of the time in which they were made, and I think that's even more true with Rocky IV than with any of the other five that have been released up to now, for three reasons. Number one, this was the height of the Cold War. Now, you and I, of course, remember that era very well,
absolutely.
but I think a lot of the younger people who either weren't alive then or don't remember it have a hard time understanding the intensity of the rivalry between the USA and the USSR at that time, and how dominant it was in our culture, in our media, and how much we just wanted to beat the Soviets in the worst way in any type of
Anything.
competition,
Absolutely.
as if it somehow proved our superiority. And athletics obviously is something that, while it doesn't prove superiority in anything other than athletics, it's so emotionally important that, it was something that we were obsessed with every time there was some kind of athletic competition. And of course, had we ever faced the Soviets in professional boxing, especially, under those circumstances as described in this film, it would have been absolutely huge, because boxing is such a sport of physical prowess. So that's the first thing you have to remember. Then, secondly, you have to remember this came out during a stretch from roughly 1983 to 91 or 92, in which Hollywood was pressuring filmmakers to keep their movies down to 90 minutes or less. The thinking was that you pay the exact same price for a ticket whether the movie's 75 minutes or 3 hours. If you have a 80 or 90 minute movie, you might be able to get 6 showings in through a day rather than 4 or 5, make more money. And so the result is you had a lot of movies with underdeveloped plots and characters. And, this movie, Rocky IV, is 91 minutes. It's about half an hour shorter than the first two. It's 10 to 15 minutes shorter than 3, 5, and 6. And now you and I, people who don't work in film probably don't think that time difference is that big a deal, but you and I know,
Right.
working in film, the difference between a 90-minute movie and a 100-minute movie is vast. Those 10 minutes make a
Right.
huge difference. So, not surprisingly, this has the thinnest plot and character development of any movie in the series. Finally, it's important to remember that this came out at the height of the music video revolution slash pop music soundtrack era, and I mention those two things together because they fed off each other. So the result is you have far more pop music in Rocky IV than in its three predecessors, and several scenes of the movie have the appearance of music videos. So, you have to understand those three things to understand why Rocky IV is the way it is. However, the way I sum it up is that while in 1985 the atmosphere was not conducive to a super serious, deep movie, I think Stallone did an outstanding job making a Rocky movie according to the trends of the day.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, one of the things, actually, Rocky IV is my favorite. And I couldn't even pinpoint like one reason why. There are a lot of factors. I think for me, being interested in psychology, that was one of my fields of study, that I see a lot of the psychological factors there, which we will talk about
Okay.
when we get into
Okay.
the plot points. One of the things you're talking about, though, with having the shorter time span, where they wanted shorter movies,
Yes.
and didn't lend itself to the character development or the plot development, that really opened the door for a sequel. Because you came
Yes.
into it, you already knew who the characters were, a lot of them. I mean, they didn't have to develop Rocky or Creed. You know, they didn't have to do that.
Right.
And you understood a lot about, okay, he's a fighter, there's going to be a fight.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's going to be some reason that he fights or doesn't, and you don't have to have a lot of extra explanation or extra plot. So I think those factors lent itself to having a sequel.
Yeah, I think that could be as well, and yeah, I think that probably did help this movie, that we did know the main characters, most of the main characters in advance. So anyway, so Rocky returns home from his behind closed door fight with Apollo Creed. We don't know who won. We might find out in the new Creed movie based on the trailer. You know, we'll find out the day before Thanksgiving when it comes out. But
we find that his son somehow is miraculously aged.
Yeah. That'll happen more so in Rocky V.
Yeah, but he did take a jump in age between 3 and 4.
Yeah, not like 4 and 5 though. That was like super steroids, you know, level.
Had to mention it though.
Yeah. But anyway, so Rocky, we know he sustained at least one bruise in the fight. And then, so he gets back home, and it's Paulie's birthday, and they give Paulie a robot, and they have a really impressive cake too, complete with the cigar, you know. And
Paulie was his typical, I want to say, typical self.
Yeah, I mean, basically, in that movie, he was fully entrenched into his comic relief sidekick role that he was in for most of 3 through 5.
Right.
And so, anyway, the robot comes in, and I got a kick out of it when I saw the movie in a theater a few days before Christmas in 1985. I was on Christmas break, in 9th grade, and I saw it at the Ohio Theater down in Madison, my hometown, and I got a kick out of the robot because I was already thoroughly familiar with it because it had been on the soap opera Days of Our Lives for at least 2 years prior to that. My mother, and especially her mother, watched Days of Our Lives religiously. And, a lot, I don't know how familiar you are with that soap opera, but at least in the 80s, it was largely set at the local hospital. And the robot, ran errands around the hospital all the time.
Now, see, I didn't know that.
Okay. So, yeah, I got a kick out of, seeing it, having already been thoroughly familiar with it. And I mean, it wasn't just used occasionally. I mean, it was all the time on Days of Our Lives. You can probably find some clips of it on YouTube.
To me, when I saw the robot, it was like that told you how much money he had to spare.
Yes.
To kind of just buy a robot as a gift.
Oh yeah, exactly. And of course, the ultimate example of spending money just because you have it. I think about the disgraced televangelist Jim Baker. He had the air-conditioned doghouses, which became a subject of fascination for the media. But
right.
So then, and I think it's one of those scenes that the Rocky critics, the people who disliked. There are not a lot, but there are a fair number of critics out there who swear that the only good movie in the series was the first one. And they tended to nitpick on scenes like this to talk about how cheap the series had become. I don't agree. I thought it was a good scene.
No, and I thought again, that's something is here. You see Rocky. In effect, he's being generous with his family.
Oh, he is, yeah.
And I think that's what they're showing. And maybe some people don't want to see the humanity part or just the ordinary everyday living, and this is what he's like part of things.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I think,
did too.
And
yeah.
I don't see why people are so uptight about it. I thought it was an innocuous scene that just and it showed in a lighthearted way that Rocky he takes care of his family, and remember, Rocky, his parents are apparently dead. He apparently is an only child, as I mentioned in a previous episode. So basically, his family is Adrian, Rocky Jr., and Paulie, and he even considered Mickey family. You know, Mickey was
right.
living with him.
Right.
So as he takes care of the little family that he has, and we always see in the end that Rocky and Paulie, they do love each other
Oh
regardless
yeah.
of how much they quarrel.
Right.
And so anyway, then we see basically largely a repeat of this scene near the beginning of 3 where you see Rocky and Adrian relaxing in bed together. Just, it's again an innocuous scene where we see that it's just enough to show that they're still happily married,
Right.
and he gives her another watch,
Another watch.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's got a thing about watches.
Yeah, because he bought him in 2, and then it was mentioned. Paulie's watch was mentioned in 3. Then he gives Adrian 1 and 4, and then of course the Paulie's watch comes back in 6.
Right.
So so then we see that Apollo, unlike most retired pro boxers, has still maintained his fortune.
Right.
So he obviously, of course, that's in character because we could see he was an astute businessman all the way back in the first
Right.
one. So it makes sense that he would sustain his fortune, and so he's he sees on TV that that Ivan Drago has entered professional boxing, and he gets mad and wants to fight him. So goes to Rocky, and
Yeah, and what's interesting there is that what's on Ivan Drago's mind
Yeah.
is fighting Rocky.
yeah,
I mean, that's his thing. And so what we're seeing again is the typical Apollo Creed ego.
yes,
I mean, him reacting to just the fact that that he's a Soviet.
yeah.
And so so it's a like patriotic ego now.
Oh yes, and I think to me that's one of the fundamental things that makes this movie work, because of course Dolph Lundgren, who plays Drago, is actually from Sweden. In fact, as a tribute, this is my Sweden shirt. For those of you who don't know, this is the Swedish flag, and Sverige is the actual name of the country. But I happen to be Swedish American myself. But anyway, had Drago been from Sweden, even had he killed Apollo Creed, this would not have had the same emotional impact.
Right.
Basically, Rocky beat a bad guy in Rocky 3. So to merely beat another bad guy wouldn't be enough. He had to not only beat a bad guy in the ring, but also symbolically beat the evil empire.
Right.
And of course, that's what makes this movie work so well. One of the main things. And so but what happens next? While it's very predictable, and of course there's no suspense in it because we saw in the trailer that Apollo dies.
Right. And of course you said he goes to Rocky.
Yeah.
And the first reaction is I'm going to narrow just by saying no. Adrian doesn't want him to do it.
Yeah.
And I don't. It's not even just about age, but she says she cares about them both too much.
Yeah.
She knows they're older, and in that too, there's a part they're watching their old fight.
Yeah.
And you do Rocky's voice better than I do,
Yeah.
but when he's saying that isn't.
Apollo, that ain't us no more.
There you go. Thank you.
Oh,
He
thanks.
says it better.
Oh, thank you. But yeah, and of course then that's when Creed gets really on the defensive, and of course then he does make a good point. He said that's easy for you to say, you're still on top. So I can see why, if I had been in Apollo's position, I would take exception to that line. Hearing it from the current heavyweight champion. But and then of course and then Rocky suggests that maybe it's you against you, and of course, which is a line that ended up being used probably by design in the song "Burning Heart" by Survivor later in the film.
Right.
Which I've never confirmed that's where they got that line from the song, but it's it probably did, because I know they got "Eye of the Tiger" from the film as well. But Anyway, so what happens next is very predictable, but again in character, because we know that Apollo Creed has a monstrous ego, he has monstrous pride, to a fault, and
We do have to talk about that press conference.
Yes, yes.
Oh, that speaking of, that is just, that press conference is, we're back to typical Apollo Creed. It's exactly what you'd expect.
Yeah.
Because here he's puffing and everything, and it's one of these things too where he's huffing and puffing, and Drago is bigger than him.
Yeah.
And so how he's looking at this guy who's physically bigger.
Yeah.
And still pulling all that, how he's gonna lose, and he's ego, and he's oversure.
Yeah.
And
it's said that he hasn't boxed in 5 years.
Right.
It's and of course the thing is, one thing that I think it's pretty obvious that that Drago was intentionally written as a vague, mysterious character. He has 6 speaking lines in the whole film, 4 in English, 2 in Russian. They were trying to give him a certain mystique, and it was not uncommon at that time for people from the USSR not to speak English, or at least not on a functional level. But usually, and I saw plenty of Soviet athletes come over to America for various events, and they were often accompanied by interpreters for
Right.
interviews, and of course, obviously, we know that 2 of the people who accompanied Drago do speak English, so could interpret for him, but they
Right.
don't for whatever reason. And I think that was just a plot device to make him, I think if you had somebody interpreting for Drago saying, I'm honored by this opportunity, it just would not have made him as fearful a character. It would have made him look more human, and they were trying to make him look more like a machine,
And possibly too, they were trying to have that illusion where, because people were ready to believe that people from we're still ready to believe that people from other countries are just automatically evil.
Oh, yes, and
and so it helped kind of promote that feeling, which I was going to say that's one of those psychological things where it's having an effect on you, because that is what happens. You tend to think anybody who's different from another country, from the country they've said is the bad guy, that you're going to think that. So
yes.
I think it helps you think that, and we'll comment later about how you get the turnaround. But.
Oh yeah, and I've seen examples of that, and of course the most obvious example being Americans, us at our ages, the USSR was a great example, but there were plenty of other examples, throughout history, as well. But and it's been interesting for me over the last, since the collapse of the USSR, that I've gotten to know several Russians personally, and it's interesting talking to them about that era,
Right.
and seeing that they're very much people like you and me, and it was our governments that had the tension, and they, there's just so much propaganda. Obviously, I love freedom, but at the same time, I see that so much of the Cold War was just a lot of propaganda,
Right.
and so but nevertheless, Sylvester Stallone is someone who he made some poor choices about what films to do, but nevertheless, he is someone who very often, especially with the Rocky movies, knew what buttons to push with the audience,
Right.
and he did that to perfection, especially with this one. But as for, and you mentioned psychology, that when we get to the Rocky Drago fight, there's a point I'm going to make there. But then the 2 people who accompanied Drago, both stereotypes. We have
Right.
Nicoli Koloff, played by Michael Pataki, who I could have sworn the guy was actually Russian. He was actually from Youngstown, Ohio. He had a heck of a Russian accent. And he's
Yeah.
a guy who acted for a long time. I don't ever recall seeing him in anything else. But
I don't know if where I know him from, and people watching us might, Trouble with Tribbles episode I believe that was of Star Trek. He was
Okay.
one of the Klingons.
Okay. What kind of accent did he have there?
Whatever the Klingon
Okay,
accent
yeah.
was,
Yeah,
I would swear to that. And but he's the one who got in the fight in the bar with Scotty.
Okay. I might if I've seen that episode, it hasn't been since I was a kid.
Sure it was Tribbles, but it was he was the one who said that the Enterprise shouldn't be hauling garbage; it should be hauled away as garbage, and there was this fight.
I don't recall that one, but yeah, he was.
Now we're analyzing a different.
But yeah, no, he was a he did a great job just as a stereotypical arrogant Russian bureaucrat.
And in effect, that's what he was as the Klingon too.
Okay.
It was the same type of character.
I wonder if he was like just a guy who played a lot of roles like that.
Yeah,
but,
but I mean, he was one of the versatile actors who tell him what accent to do and he's got it. I think.
Yeah, that was the same thing with James Doohan, who played Scotty. He was a
Right.
master of accents. But my brother actually did a Russian accent for a movie one time. I've never seen the movie, but he demonstrated it for me over the phone. It sounded convincing to me. But accents are something I have very little experience in through my acting, and I would like to delve more into that. I think it's a great challenge that I would enjoy a lot. I mean, like for example, when you did the R sound for Drago, I still can't do that R. It's why, like I said, I'm Swedish American. I speak some Swedish, but when I talk to other Swedes, like I'm involved in the local Swedish Heritage Society, when I speak Swedish to them, I still can never do the accent, so they can always tell that I'm not from there, just through the R sound, But anyway, then the other one was a late addition to the script, Ludmilla. And I always got a kick out of Ludmilla and Ivan being a couple. I just cannot see them loving up on each other.
No, although she obviously always had that look on her face like she was just impressed by his physical appearance.
Yeah.
So it's like there was nothing deeper.
And by the way, she was a last minute addition to the script. Of course, she was played by Brigitte Nielsen, who was at the time Stallone's wife, for only about a year and a half. And and it was a very dark period in Stallone's life because he had just divorced his first wife, Sasha Zak, who's the mother of Sage and Sergio, his two sons, and then he married Brigitte, later that year. And have you ever seen Stallone's mother, Jackie, interviewed?
No.
She is, she's very brash, very crusty. And she talked about how much she shortly after the divorce, she said on a talk show how much she couldn't stand Brigitte and didn't even go to the wedding. And so, she's not one who hides her feelings. And she's pretty tough, too. She's 93, still living. But anyway, though, so Stallone wrote her in, and they divorced, by the way, in a year and a half. And then Stallone was single for almost 10 years before he married Jennifer Flavin, who's the mother of his three daughters. But aside from that, most of her dialogue, Ludmilla's dialogue, actually was originally Nicoli Koloff's dialogue. So they split it up, and just to, so he could give his wife a role. And then they actually appeared together the next year in the cop movie Cobra, as well. I think that was their only other appearance together, but. So it's interesting that this Russian couple actually both Scandinavians. She's from Denmark, he's from Sweden, but I guess she had a great Russian accent herself.
Yeah.
And basically the same snobbish, arrogant, stereotypical bureaucrat that you would expect. And it's too bad that well, actually, we don't know that they didn't because we don't know what happened to them after this movie. But if Ludmilla and Ivan ever had kids, I can only imagine. Because according to IMDb, Lundgren is 6'5", and I believe Nielsen is 6 feet even. So they could have had some, pretty intimidating kids together. But anyway, so. The press conference, and like I said back in the Rocky 2 episode, this is largely a reverse of that press conference where, Rocky's taking it as a joke and then Apollo gets really mad. This time, Apollo's taking it as a joke and Drago gets mad.
Right.
And, so...
But it's almost like but I was going to say, it's like they're not taking it as a joke for the same type of reason.
Yeah, exactly.
In this case, it's just really because Apollo is 200% sure
Yeah.
that the Russian athlete's a joke.
Oh, right,
Period.
And then I like the part where they're leaving the press conference, and then you see Drago shove the cardboard cutout of Apollo, and that's the first time you see any emotion out of Drago the whole movie. After that, he's just been completely stoic. I mean, and of course, you go back to the scene where he's demonstrating his strength, and where they say that he hits with 1,850 pounds of pressure per square inch, and I'm not enough of an expert to know if that's humanly possible or not. But I like the scene where basically the bureaucrat nods at Drago, and then he just punches that thing, and then you see the readout. It's very well done, and of course with that pulsating synthesizer music by Vince DiCola, the only movie of the six in which he, not Bill Conti, did the background music, and we'll talk more about that later about DiCola's music.
And also, I guess too, where they were asking about steroids.
Yeah.
And his wife says, it's like your Popeye, he eats his spinach.
Yeah.
But it plants that seed about the steroids.
Yeah, and of course, which we got a little more clue of it in the training montage. But yeah, that was and of course the line about Popeye, that was cute. And you can see a Russian Soviet bureaucrat making that kind of comment just to try to get on the good side of the Americans. And so then the fight comes, and I like the scene where you see Drago in the ring, and then all of a sudden the ring raises into the arena, and just the way that he's looking, mesmerized by everything.
Yeah.
And Dolph Lundgren, by the way, it should be noted, this was his second movie. His first was A View to a Kill. He had a bit part in that movie. That was the last James Bond movie with Roger Moore. And they auditioned 8,000 people for the role of Drago. They at first thought that Lundgren was too tall, and then they ended up giving it to him anyway. And should be noted, by the way, that he had not boxed before, but he had been he was very accomplished in competitive karate.
Okay.
And in fact, he was a third-degree black belt. And but he was also probably the most educated person ever in the Rocky series. He has a degree in chemistry and 2 in chemical engineering. So
something else I did not know.
Yeah.
No.
So if he never acted again, he would have no problem finding good employment. Yeah, he actually could have attended. He also was given a Fulbright scholarship to attend MIT, but then he ended up. I think that's when his acting career started off. But so he's not a dumb jock by any means. But and a lot of his education, by the way, he one of his degrees is from Washington State, which is why if you ever heard him interviewed, he speaks completely fluent English. So anyway, but yeah, I like the way that he just looks so fascinated and just mesmerized by,
Or all of them too, like he's looking around like, what the?
Yeah.
I mean.
Yeah, and you can imagine if you've lived, a sheltered life in the USSR, and you're going to be completely, because I remember the first time I went to Las Vegas when I was 22, I had seen pictures of it, but it's not the same as seeing it in person. And I was just overwhelmed by all the lights there, so I can only imagine if I had been raised in the USSR and suddenly were exposed to all that glitz. So that was a really good scene. And then, I like. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I think too when you see Apollo and Rocky in the locker room. Talk there, because one of the things that always struck me is that there was no way Apollo was ready to box anybody.
Yeah, I mean, sort of like how we say in Rocky 3, Mickey knew that Rocky was not ready for that fight with Clubber Lang.
And it might be, because he's telling Rocky he's in the best shape and all that, but there's actually a difference between being in shape and being in shape for a fight. Those are two different things. So even if Apollo worked out every day, there's a huge difference between just doing your workout to maintain yourself and doing that workout for a fight.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And he obviously had done no training for this.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And he hadn't boxed in a long time. And so when Rocky, in effect, is telling him he's not ready, Rocky's right.
Yeah, and of course it reminds me of something, and this, we'll get into more of this in Rocky 5, but I just yesterday I saw an old interview with the late Tommy Morrison, and he was talking about, in the montage in Rocky 5, well, there's two montages where you see him, is fighting a string of opponents. They were paying people $5,000 a punch. They were paying bit actors $5,000 to take one punch from him to make it look real. And
Okay.
but he seriously injured two of the people. One broke his jaw, the other shattered one of his bones right here. But anyway, and Morrison said something like, the only way to get in shape, to be hit is to be hit, And so I think it's the same thing, like what you're saying. I mean, if no matter how good your conditioning is, if you're not, if you haven't been fighting for 5 years, and
Right. And it was obvious, that because every time Rocky was really training hard for a fight, he was doing special different things.
Oh yes,
all the time. So Creed hadn't been doing this, and I do think, like I said, and something else Rocky pointed out, he didn't know anything about Drago, and so a lot of time, and something some people may or may not know is when boxers they will watch their opponents' previous fights and see how they stand, how they hold themselves, if they have any little moves that tip off a punch. And he knew nothing. He hadn't seen any footage. Here's fighting nothing.
And here's one thing where you have to go back to the historical context. Today, that wouldn't be the situation. There'd at least be some YouTube clips of him.
Right.
But you go back 30 years ago, it's very believable. If a guy's never had a professional fight, you might not be able to find any video on him.
Right.
And I mean, like for example, let me go back. Go back to in the 1986 NCAA tournament. That's the year after this movie came out. Notre Dame was upset by Arkansas Little Rock in the first round, and Notre Dame's head coach at the time, Digger Phelps, rationalized the defeat, saying they were unable to find any videotape of their opponent, who undoubtedly had been able to find lots of video on Notre Dame. So 30 years ago, it was very believable that you fight a guy who couldn't find anything on.
So he was in that position.
Yeah.
He wasn't ready for the fight. Rocky was right about that. I think what Apollo had going at that time was, we're back to ego.
Yeah,
we're back
of course,
to just self-confidence, and
exactly, and going back also to the original, it's very likely that Apollo Creed would have not been able to find any video of Rocky fighting.
Right.
Because probably, of course, at that time, go back to the mid-70s, there probably no video existed of Rocky,
Right, but of course in that one, he would have had to assume he hadn't had any major fights, so he was making an assumption about his ability.
Yeah.
So in this, you knew that Drago was non-professional.
Right,
right. We're almost going to say like Olympic boxing something, but he was a champion in his own category. So that had to tell you he must have been good to some degree, but still wasn't, here Apollo can't accept that.
Right. And so, anyway, so Rocky tries to talk Apollo out of it, first back at Rocky's mansion, then right before the fight. And of course, there are, predictable scenes. You know that, or you pretty well know Rocky's going to try to talk Apollo out of it, and Apollo's not going to do it. And, his ego wouldn't let him back out.
Right.
And, of course, especially right before the fight, there's no way that Apollo's going to back out in the locker room,
Absolutely.
You look at the way he provoked Rocky into the rematch, for God's sake,
Well, and of course, especially what we don't know at the time when he, obviously before a fight he's not going to back out, but especially with that big entrance he'd created for himself, which you don't know about if you hadn't seen it. yeah, I mean, where with James Brown,
Yeah.
the whole thing,
Yeah, and I got a kick out of that, with and it should be noted that song actually, "Living in America," that was James Brown's first top 40 single in 11 or 12 years. And he was in his early 50s at the time. There's a rare example of a guy in his 50s or older having a major hit single on the pop charts. And of course, that movie was a big reason for it. It got such great exposure. But yeah, I got a kick out of that, with him and all the dancers and the band and everything. And then Apollo, how he comes out as George Washington in the original for the main fight. That he comes out again, with all the red, white, and blue stuff. And by the way, it's great to see that the red, white, and blue trunks make a comeback in Creed.
No.
I don't know if you noticed that from the trailer or not, but
yeah.
But yeah, he Adonis, Apollo's son, does wear the red, white, and blue trunks in the Creed movie in the trailer, which we'll talk about later. But so then
and of course, there's the bit where you're gonna have to. For some reason, I can't. Drago's wife's name, I can't.
Ludmilla. Yeah.
See, that's the word I can't get out.
Yeah.
Ludmilla.
Yeah.
Where they, and it's a setup. They take her over to
Apollo's wife.
To Apollo's wife.
Yeah.
And talks about, when this is over, I hope we can be friends. And
yeah.
And you see that look on Apollo's wife's face, and she's kind of like, I hope so. And she's very, and but they get their photo op.
Yeah.
The ones I wanted was them smiling at each other and shaking hands. So they get the photo op that they wanted.
Right. Yeah. And of course, Sylvia Meals made her second and last appearance in the series there. She was also in part 2. She never had a very big role, and of course, I still remember you mentioned that she ought to play Michelle Obama, if they can find her. But, yeah, it'll be, interesting to see, I wish they would have brought her back for the new Creed movie, since Marianne Creed is a character in the movie, and so we'll have to see how Felicia Rashad does, in that role, but she looks good in the trailer, but we'll see.
Yeah.
And so the fight starts, and first they go up to touch gloves, and Drago speaks for the first time in the movie. You will lose.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that too is that where Apollo, is come on, get him up.
Yeah.
And when he does hit him, that's the first inkling that Apollo has about how strong Drago really is.
Yeah.
About what might really happen.
Yeah.
Because he reacts. Yeah, I mean, he actually does react.
Yeah.
But he kind of has to put that out of his, that like that first moment, that fleeting moment, you see him kind of like, what am I in? What did I get myself into?
Oh yeah, and of course the line "You will lose." That's the first line that he speaks, and of course I like the line at the press conference. When they ask Drago a question and he doesn't answer, and then Apollo says something like his tongue didn't get through customs. And at that point, you assume because the way you just said "you will lose," the simple 3-word expression. You assume that Drago speaks minimal English, or maybe somebody just taught him those 3 words. So anyway, within the middle of the first round, Drago gains control of the fight, and then at the end, Drago continues hitting after the bell.
Right.
And in real life, he very well could have been disqualified for that.
Right.
And but anyway, then that's when Duke, who has, I would say Duke has his biggest role in Rocky IV of any film in the series. Where he's the most active, has the most dialogue and everything. Did you agree or?
I was mentally thinking about Rocky Balboa. I know he was pretty. You see him there a lot, but maybe not as much dialogue.
Yeah, because he does, and he doesn't show up until into, I'd say, the second half of the movie.
Yeah.
But then he's there the rest of the way. But anyway, so then then he starts yelling at Drago's people, saying this is supposed to be an exhibition, and of course, obviously, Drago doesn't see it that way, and nobody in his corner does. They see it as a way to prove Soviet superiority.
Oh, absolutely. The other thing too is that, assuming Drago doesn't, if he only knows minimal English. If you said, he wouldn't know the word exhibition anyway.
Oh yeah.
And it's more than likely his people
Yeah.
didn't bother to tell him.
That would not be unusual for the Soviet
Right,
days.
because I mean, I'm going to jump a bit, but it's obvious by what he says at the end of the fight that he didn't. He thought it was a real fight.
Oh yeah, and I mean, to put this is an example. I mean, my uncle Steve was a big historian. I think his degree was in history, and he told me that the Soviet government did not reveal that they had been invaded by Nazi Germany for 9 days. So yeah, I can imagine that they would hide from Drago that it was an exhibition, and of course, being that we don't know how long Creed had the heavyweight championship belt, but we know that at the time, he had the first fight with Rocky. He was 44-0 with 44 knockouts, so we can assume he'd probably had it for several years.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, to beat, for their top boxer to go over and beat a longtime American heavyweight champion, that would be a huge thing.
Right.
To show
Absolutely.
Soviet superiority. So they would really want to do it. So anyway, they go to the corner, and it's interesting that it's Rocky, not Duke, who's running the corner. And I don't know how realistic a scenario that is. Obviously, it was a plot device, nevertheless. But
you know what? And I hate to jump back. One thing we forgot about is when they were introducing him, and Apollo had all those names.
Oh yeah,
That is something worth mentioning because we're talking about the ego, and Rocky commented on the fact.
Asked him if he had enough nicknames. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was it, and of course they introduced Rocky from the side too. But I was just remembering that long list. Master of Disaster, and all the rest of them.
Right. Yeah. There were at least 4 or 5, if not more. I'll have to go back and count.
Yeah.
But,
so I thought that was worth mentioning. That was just something else.
Oh yeah. And I mean, it certainly shows what a showman Apollo was.
Right,
that he hadn't lost any of his flamboyance. And it seems to me that in a more realistic scenario would have been Duke in the corner, but of course, obviously, Duke would have stopped the fight, and I think, and like I said, I'm sure it was a plot device to have Rocky, managing the corner instead. And
yeah, and that's, we were talking psychologically what's going on.
Yeah. Is
because in the corner, Rocky was saying he was going to stop it.
Yeah.
And basically, Apollo told him no.
Right.
I mean, and it's an interesting thing because later when Duke is yelling "stop the fight" and Rocky's kind of holding that towel, and I guess it has to work because Duke might not have given in to Apollo's wishes at that point.
I think Duke would have thrown the towel.
Right, and so you had to have, and it's like only another fighter would understand.
Yeah, because remember that Duke, as took a very protective role over in Apollo, and
he wanted to throw the towel in one, in fact. Too.
Oh yeah, he did, and just as Mickey did, and one thing I thought of, we talked in one of the past episodes about how the father-son type relationship that a lot of boxers have with their trainers. And I think another thing I thought of is that there are certainly examples of football, baseball, basketball coaches that have close relationship with some players, but it's not the same as when for a team sport.
Yeah, boxing is more one-on-one.
Yeah, so you just have lots and lots of one-on-one time,
right.
And you feel like this person, you feel like it's a son. And then of course Duke later explicitly said that Apollo was like a son to me. I raised him, and when he died, a part of me died. So yeah, I'm sure that Duke would have done it. But Rocky, he and Apollo were friends, but they didn't have the same kind of the dynamics in their relationship.
Right, and again.
And like I said, Rocky, being a boxer himself, he understood.
A boxer himself who had refused to let his manager throw in the towel.
Yeah, he said, "Stop! If you stop it, I'll kill you." He said to Mickey in the first one.
Right, and so, I just that image of him frozen there with the towel, and Creed could see him.
Yeah.
And Creed was giving him that look, like, don't you dare.
He shook his head no.
Yeah.
And there's one other thing I just read a couple of days ago. I had never even thought about this, but it's worth mentioning because I was intrigued by it. Somebody mentioned that I think it was on an IMDb message boards that he believes that Apollo, sensed that he was going to get killed, but his pride wouldn't let him, stop the fight, and that because this person mentioned the interaction where how he looks out to his wife and she looks back at him, and then the dynamics, the emotion and the body language of each that they had with each other at that time, and then of course with Rocky, how he just shakes his head at Rocky when he sees that Rocky's holding the towel, and then of course I love Duke's such a fiery, passionate character that he finally, after telling him Rocky several times, then finally he just lets out something like, "For God's sake, throw the damn towel." And then that's when Drago gives the fatal blow to the head.
Now, I do have to say this. This is, since we were talking about, too, that Drago kept hitting after the bell.
Yes, yes.
I've always imagined Rocky could have thrown 20 towels, and Drago would have kept hitting him.
That could be as well, yeah. I mean, that could have been what he was programmed to do.
Right. I mean, I think until his person told him to stop.
Yeah.
Even though I think throwing the towel is universal.
Yeah.
I just don't think he would have stopped hitting.
Yeah, and because there was, to me, the way that, I don't remember if it was Koloff or one of the other Soviet bureaucrats, who did it, but so one of them, just nodded at Drago, and then he punched that bag just as a demonstration of his strength. And that's when you see, 1850 or whatever pops up on the screne. And then, of course, that classic line, "Whatever he hits, he destroys." But, I mean, yeah, to me, that shows, to me, that just epitomized Soviet bureaucratic control. That they had him that well trained that you just a nod and he, follows the orders.
And you could see that he was, even in the ring,
yeah,
his trainer would tell him when to do that
yes,
punch,
yes. Yeah.
And, and that fatal blow, I think, and you said that people knew that was coming because they had heard,
Oh yeah, the trailer shows that,
right.
Apollo, getting killed. Yeah.
So, I think it would have been interesting if they hadn't shown that happening in the trailer and nobody knew it was coming. I've always thought that would be an interesting reaction. But again, I look at everything psychologically. Yeah. That's one of those things too, wherever and then everybody, obviously everybody in the whole arena goes crazy.
Yeah.
And there's two opposite things happening. You've got the people who are dealing with Drago, and interviewing him because they're supposed to, because he won. They're supposed to handle that. And then there's all the pandemonium over Creed there, dying. And so, and there's a lot of that in this particular movie where you see opposite things, or kind of, and that comes later, what type of the training sequences. But I just always said with Stallone, I thought he played that, that distraught look. But
yeah.
That moment where he and Drago exchanged that look. Because he's the one that Drago wanted. And it's like at that moment he knew he had him.
Yeah.
He knew it. That I get very intense with that, but that's something that he knew it. Nothing had been said. He knew he was going to have that fight that he wanted.
Oh yeah, definitely. And then it should be noted that during the filming, that actually the production was halted because, Carl Weathers actually quit the movie for 4 days because Lundgren apparently threw a lot of real punches that connected with him.
Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah, and I've read that a few times over the years. And then finally they talked him into quitting, and Lundgren agreed that he would, tone down his aggressiveness. But one thing that should be noted about Stallone is that he has sustained several serious, I don't mean superficial stuff, I mean serious injuries over the years doing his own stunts.
Right.
And, he at one time, I think he was intensive care during 8 days, because he basically told, Lundgren to punch him in the chest as hard as he could. And it actually, one of his ribs was pressing against his heart or something like that. I have to go read exactly what the injury was, but it was pretty gruesome. And I mean,
I wouldn't tell anybody. I mean, I wouldn't. I wouldn't tell, a little 2-year-old to
Yeah.
punch me as hard as they could.
Oh yeah, yeah. So
So
it's,
yeah, that doesn't.
and it's I remember one time in the movie From Ashes. It's the only time I've done a long sustained scene of violence. The guy who I ended up having a fight with. He thought I wasn't being he told me to be more aggressive with him, and I got a few minor scrapes and bruises, but nothing big. But
Well, what some people don't know about
Yeah.
me,
yeah,
when I was junior high age and first, I had a mentor who kind of hooked me up with some people who did student films at the time. They
Okay.
were and at that, and just so you know too, in those days, when you did a student film, it was just like any other assignment you did for the university.
Yeah.
You didn't get to put it in regular film festivals. You didn't. There wasn't this scope, and you had your copy that you turned in. It became property of the college. So this is where things like that ended up.
yeah,
But I did one where basically my character toward the end,
Oh.
she was a teen,
yeah,
gets out of a cab, and is supposed to come stop a problem,
yeah.
and this cop shoots her, just
Okay.
shoots her.
Yeah,
So my job is to fall down dead,
yeah.
and then with the end of the movie, this particular cop is supposed to walk up and kick the character's dead body.
Oh yeah.
Well, this actor kicked me for real, so
Oh no.
I'm just gonna.
Yeah.
So I do understand,
Yeah.
so I can. I'm kind of. That's why what reminded me of the story.
Yeah.
If he had somebody punching, and he knew it was coming. I didn't. I mean, I'm assuming I'm gonna get like an actor's kick.
Right, right.
And the problem was after he did that, I had to stay in character, dead.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So I'm lying there. So of course, after somebody finally yelled "cut," I went, "Ah,"
Yeah, and of course, one way to get around that, you just like put some sort of padding there,
And well, cheap student film. They didn't do
Oh, I
anything. They
understand.
hadn't briefed this guy, and it said, Detective Donovan kicks her.
Oh yeah.
Okay, So I
Yeah, it can
total
happen.
aside there.
Oh yeah, the point is that people do all the time have serious injuries on film sets, and I always say that if nobody gets hurt at all, it probably means that he didn't make it look very realistic. But yeah, I mean, I remember this one, like this guy when I just started. The idea is that I was supposed to like put both hands around his neck, start choking him, and I was just doing it like really lightly like this, and he told me no, really, really, really to get into it, And it's so much against my nature, but
right. I'd be
Yeah.
nervous about hurting somebody too
Oh,
much. Yeah.
I was too, yeah.
Okay.
But anyway, though, so yeah, but Stallone has sustained a lot of injuries, but apparently Creed, and like I said, Creed played several years in both the NFL and the CFL, so I mean, he obviously was in great shape to take punishment.
Right.
But he,
and he's taken injuries, but I think probably under these circumstances too, it's
Yeah.
not what he signed on for.
Oh, right.
When you go out to play football, if
Yeah,
you
yeah.
you got to expect you're maybe going to be tackled. If you're in a scene where the other person isn't really supposed to be connecting
Yeah.
for damage,
Oh,
and
yeah.
is, then that's not what you're there for.
Yeah, but Stallone apparently is just a guy who just really likes to even put his safety at risk for the sake of making it look real,
I mean, and that's his choice.
And
I'm
he,
gonna say that.
he even did. I mean, he was 59 when he made Rocky Balboa, and took some real punches from Antonio Tarver, who's a high level professional boxer.
So.
Who had Tarver was actually in the light heavyweight division, but he had one of the championship belts at the time, and so
One of the things too, when Apollo, and I say he's dying in Rocky's
Yeah.
arms there, and I heard
Yeah.
that, and just with with him telling people to get back, and all the photographers and all the craziness
Yeah.
going, for some people who my age and older,
Mhm.
it reminded me of the scene in the kitchen pantry when Bobby Kennedy was
oh
shot.
yeah.
And I don't know if that was something that was intentional, accidental, or what, but I say it too because it reminds you of a fallen American hero.
That could be, it wouldn't
Just
be. I
something
never
about
thought of that, but yeah, now that you mentioned it, I see the comparison.
And just something about it, the way, and I was like,
Yeah, and of course, just I watched Rocky 5 again a couple of days ago, I watched it on Sunday just to get more brushed up for the next episode, and there was one thing in there. It's a much more lighthearted thing, but there's something else that now I'd never noticed before that I think might have been inspired by some event actually from about the same time period as the Kennedy assassination.
Talk about
yeah.
that, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and the thing is too, where that is, and of course it's in these two opposite things happening when they're talking, and Drago says, "I beat real champion."
Yeah, yeah.
I think, and so I think too it was obvious he had no idea what exhibition was or anything like that.
Oh, yeah.
I think to him it was a real fight, and that was it.
And one thing also, and think that Carl Weathers, you know, and by the way, I said Creed played in the NFL and CFL. I meant to say Weathers, Carl Weathers, of course. Anyway, though, another thing, and I read this the other day, that you know, Weathers really tried hard to be convincing in the death, and so he intentionally fell face first. I mean, he looked
Right.
lifeless, you know.
Right.
Because basically, when you fall forward, you know, just in involuntary reactions, you stick your hands out to try to, you know, break the fall, or you know, to absorb the impact. But yeah, he really did fall face first, and then he just jumped as if his body were, you know, just shutting down. It looked very realistic.
Right.
And then, you know, I also thought, you know, the Sylvia Meals as Apollo's wife did a great job, you know, looking in horror, you know.
Yeah.
And then I also liked where you go from, I don't remember which one it showed first, but in quick succession they showed her acting in horror, and then you see Ludmilla just, you know, with that smirk on her face, you know.
Right.
And, you know, that was such the juxtaposition of those two, it was so powerful, I thought. Again, heightened by Vince Nicola's music there. And, you know, I'll tell you, like I said, this is the only movie in which Bill Conti did not do the background music. And I think it worked really well with Vince Nicola, though, because, you know, he is a synthesizer maestro. And to me, this movie was so technology dominated. I thought that was such a great match.
Right.
And it should be noted that Nicola, just a few months later, he did the music for the Transformers, the movie, which is not to be confused with any of the Michael Bay live action films, but this is a 1986 cartoon, also based on the toys. But even though it was not a big box office hit, it has a zealous cult following. And he did the music for that movie too, which is very, very similar to his Rocky IV music. I don't think it's quite as good, but it's still good. And he got that job specifically because someone involved in that movie loved his Rocky IV music.
Okay.
And prior to that, by the way, he had DeCola actually got his start playing in Frank Stallone's backing band, and did some of the music for the movie Staying Alive in 1983, the sequel to Saturday Night Fever, which was directed by Stallone.
Right.
So anyway, then you see that Rocky speaks at Apollo's funeral, and it's nothing out of the ordinary, but it was, you know, it was sincere, and it's what you would expect, you know. You know, it was I thought it's a very, you know, emotional, believable scene. It's about what you would expect Rocky to say, you know. And then and this is part of, you know, going back to what I said at the top of the episode about, you know, how films were so condensed because they were trying to keep them down to 90 minutes or less. If you watch the trailer, which you just go to YouTube, type in Rocky IV trailer, there's a scene where you see Rocky sitting at a table in front of the boxing commission, and you hear one of the boxing commissioners say, he's referring to Drago, he's had one professional fight and one man is dead. Now that scene is not in the movie.
In the movie.
Basically, in fact, the plot element that comes out of that scene is not ignored, but it is downplayed. Basically, what that scene was, the boxing commission was saying they would not sanction Rocky's fight against Drago.
But I think, don't you see that like in a paper headline?
Yeah, they replaced it with, there was a newspaper collage,
Right.
but they don't. So you know, and there were several media clippings that are
Right.
in that collage. And then also before the match starts, when you see commentators from different countries, and one of the different clips, like you see like Japanese commentators, and then when you see the British commentators, one of them briefly says that this fight is not for the title.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't really make that a major plot element.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, actually, in the scene that was cut, I read that basically they told Rocky that if he fought Drago, he would be stripped of the title. And obviously, they went back on that because at the beginning of Rocky V, Rocky is still the champion. So
Because he won.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, fine. I was
So,
trying to move it.
but yeah, basically, that was one of those scenes that was cut, I guess, to get it down to the 90-minute or so mark. And so we go straight from that to the press conference. Where it's just what you would expect.
Right.
And it's very unlikely. Just like in Rocky 2, you just wonder why is Paulie there at the press conference, except to provide some
Well, because provide the antagonist that you need. Because knowing
Yeah.
Rocky, he's not the one who's going to get
Yeah.
to the verbal
Yeah, I mean he's too
thing.
gentlemanly to
Right.
do that, and
verbal sparring
and
with Michael Pataki. So, it's Paulie that has to jump up and do that.
So and like Paulie makes some sort of comment. Of course, it sounded like he was talking about the Berlin Wall actually, and of course that's still in character for Paulie because he's not that bright a guy. But what he said though, it really epitomized the everyday middle American at that time.
Right.
With their feelings about communism. And so that's something that and of course then when Pataki asks who's that, and he says the unsilent majority,
Right.
and that really epitomizes what a lot of mid-Americans felt at that time.
Yeah.
The hatred of all things associated with Eastern Europe, with communism.
Right.
So like I said, the press conference is just what you'd expect, and of course the plot element about the fight being in Russia. And of course I love Paulie. Are you nuts?
Yeah, like he's just hearing this.
But yeah, but really the rationale for it, being in Russia, that's very believable. Yeah, Drago would have gotten death threats.
Yes,
like
that is
Ludmilla
true.
claimed. Yeah.
I think she was right about that. And she
Oh,
was also
yeah.
right when she was saying, you think that we are so bad and you are so good.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And that's
That's really.
it,
I mean, it was a very polarizing, very black and white thing.
right.
That's the way. I'm embarrassed the way that I viewed it. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, communism was evil, but it's one of those things that I look back, at it. I mean, there was a lot of propaganda more than anything else, and I think it's sadly that the hatred of communism made a lot of people overlook a lot of things that were wrong in America.
Exactly. And I was going to say that I think there are, if you really look at any style of government,
Yeah.
you're going to find good and bad aspects.
Of course, yeah.
I'm not going to use the term evil.
Yeah.
But the thing is that nobody ever wants to look at their own house, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that was the thing, and it's embarrassing to me to think that I bought into, we're the good guys, they're the bad guys, I mean, yes, I mean, their government was worse than ours, but, ours, leaves a lot to be desired too,
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that it's not as bad as theirs doesn't mean it's, all so pristine,
Right.
So, the press conference was, pretty much what you would expect, and I'm not sure about why they had it on Christmas. Although one thing about if they did actually have such a fight on Christmas, obviously you guarantee everybody's going to be home to watch it.
And I think that it's one of those things too, because what our 100% impression of communists is that they didn't believe in God.
Yeah, yeah.
So it was almost supposed to be an affront on that line.
I never thought of that. Yeah, that could be.
Right. They
Yeah.
were, and so I thought it had something to do with that.
I never thought about that. That's good. 'Cause, it's been nearly 30 years since I saw it. But, then that's one thing interesting about seeing a movie over a period of decades. You just learn different things from it all the time. And of course, why I'm glad that I included you, because you've given me some things that for all these decades I never thought of, and hopefully I've done the same for you, and hopefully we're doing the same for all the viewers out there. So anyway, then we've barely talked about. Gosh, we're already over an hour into this. We've barely talked about Adrian. Of course, Talia Shire had of the 5 movies that she's in, she had her smallest role in this one.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it was unnecessary. We see in that scene briefly at the beginning that they're happily married, and she's briefly on the discussion with Apollo, and but then then
she gets to hear about it from the press.
Yes, yes.
She gets to hear about the fight.
Yeah.
She's coming home, and she really, truly does. I understand now. People get accosted by the press all the time, and they'll feign not knowing what's going on because they don't want to talk anymore. But she really didn't know what they were talking about.
Right.
I mean, she genuinely was like, I don't know what you're talking about. You're wrong. There's no fight. And
right. And then. So then, they have that argument. It's again, very typical. And of course, the thing is, before Adrian was only, when she tried to get Rocky to stop fighting, she was only concerned about his health. Now she's concerned about his life.
Right.
She describes it as suicide. And, to me, the scene is nothing special except that it had to be there. We had to see the dispute between Rocky and Adrian. So, it's just... to me, it sort of epitomizes what you said about part 2 in general, that it's not your favorite, but it had to be there, though,
Right.
It's, like that Rocky and Adrian argument, it's not one of my favorite scenes of the movie or of the series, but again, it was a necessary scene. We had to see that conflict. So we see Adrian disapproves, and she describes it as suicide, and
right.
Then I remember the line, "You can't win," that was played in the commercials, and
I remember that.
Yeah, and so then Rocky drives off, and here we see one of the music video sequences set to the song "No Easy Way Out" by Robert Tepper, which was one of 3 top 40 singles from the movie, and which was the only top 40 hit of Robert Tepper's career as a performer. I think he had some hits for other artists that he wrote that were performed by other artists. I'll have to look that up. I know he wrote Pat Benatar's single "La Belle Age," which came out about the same time. But anyway, it's a very good scene, and where you see Rocky drive off, and you see a collage of almost every pivotal moment of the series up to that point.
Right.
And
it's easy to believe that that's what's running through his mind.
Yeah, very much so. And it's a good song that really worked well with that scene. And again, it's again a very synthesizer heavy, which goes with the movie's heavy reliance on technology.
Yeah.
And then so after that, then Rocky says goodbye to Rocky Jr. and for their only major scene together, they had a little bit of interaction early on when he was outside, I think, washing the car or something. But this time, it's where they have it's a nice scene. Is enough to show that like all the Rocky/Rocky Jr. scenes in 2, 3, and 4. It's just enough to show that they have a good relationship and he's a loving father. It's in 5 and 6 when you really delve deeply into that relationship, which is a very good aspect of 5 and 6, which we'll get into in the next 2 episodes. But by the way, one thing I forgot, this is going off topic, but I just found out the other day. I mentioned how Rocky Jr. is played by a different actor in 2 through 6, each of those 5 films. I didn't realize in Rocky 2 he was actually played by Sergio Stallone, who was Sylvester's infant son at the time.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So yeah, both of his sons played Rocky Jr. at some point in the series.
Okay.
But ironically, the kid who I mentioned it was Ian Freed in Rocky 3. In Rocky 4, it was strangely a kid who's credited as Rocky Krakoff, who, like Ian Freed, had a fairly extensive string of, stuff in the 80s and then basically disappeared after that. Rocky Krakow was not his real name, by the way. He had an Italian name, appropriately, you know.
Okay.
But I'll have to look up to see what it was. But anyway, so they, you know, it's a nice scene, and you know, he has the cute line like, you know, if a big man wanted to beat me up, I'd be scared.
Right.
So then Rocky goes off to the Soviet Union, and where he's going to train, and then of course Paulie does a repeat of, you know, his whole thing when he arrived at the gym in Los Angeles, talking about how it's below human standards, complaining about everything.
Right.
And if I were Rocky, I'm not sure I would have wanted Paulie to go along with me, because I've just seen him as a big distraction. But
But that gets addressed too, because when Paulie says you kept me.
Oh
around,
yeah, that was.
But you know, what's interesting is Sylvia said to Rocky, you know, it's everything you asked for.
Yeah.
So.
And of course he's assigned to those people who have to go around with him all the time, which actually, you know, works its way into a humorous and emotionally satisfying moment later in the film that we'll get to, but. And, you know, then of course Duke is with him, and I like the talk that Duke gives to Rocky when they first get there, you know. And also, I meant to mention, when they land there in the USSR, I like that, you know, and it's another music video type sequence. It's the Survivor song "Burning Heart." Now, Survivor had 8 top 40 singles, but the top 2 were both from Rocky movies. They had Eye of the Tiger and then of course Burning Heart from Rocky 4. And I meant to say this in the last episode, but you know, since Survivor, you know, is in this movie, it's appropriate to mention here as well. Stallone actually discovered them back in 1981 when he was working on Rocky 3. That year, they had a hit single called "Poor Man's Son," which wasn't a huge hit. It made it number 33 on the Billboard Hot 100. But a friend of Stallone's, who worked for Scotti Brothers Records, Survivor's record company at the time, knew Stallone was looking for a hard rock song for Rocky 3 to try to get, you know, a more of a young male audience. So anyway, Survivor had a new album called Premonition. This guy played it for Stallone, and Stallone loved Poor Man's Son, which, even though it's not a training type song, it has a very blue collar feel to it, where you could like see it being played in one of the early scenes of one of the first 2, like where he's, you know, maybe walking down a sidewalk or something.
I got till 3:30.
Okay. But you know, that was, so Stallone contacted the band, and you know, they did, you know, Eye of the Tiger, and then of course Stallone has praised the song over the years, and then of course he brought them back for Rocky 4, and they did 2 songs for the movie. They did Burning Heart, and then they did another song that originally, in an early cut, was in the closing credits, but ended up being deleted. A ballad called "Man Against the World." It's a very beautiful song, and it was then put on Survivor's next studio album, "When Seconds Count," which came out in 1986. But it's a great song worth checking out, and then the song was later added as a bonus track to the Rocky 4 soundtrack years later, though not on the original pressings. And so anyway, they go. Duke gives Rocky that great speech, you know, where, you know, talking about, you know, Apollo was like my son. I raised him, and when he died, a part of me died, and then tells him that, you know, he's going to have to go through hell, but at the end he'll be the one standing. And
right, and then he says, "You know what to do it." You know, I mean, it.
Yeah, and another piece of trivia, you know, in that scene, you know, Duke is shown playing that Russian guy in chess. Of course, Russia is known to being a big chess country. A lot of the world chess champions have come from there. And Tony Burton actually is a chess player in real life. And they added that scene simply for that reason. In fact, but there's a piece of trivia. Garrett Brown, who was a cinematographer on Rockies 1, 2, and 5, also was a cinematographer on The Shining, and in the DVD commentary of The Shining, which Tony Burton also has a small role in, playing the role of Larry Durkin, Brown mentioned that Tony Burton often played chess with Stanley Kubrick on the set of The Shining. Kubrick was known as a chess master. In fact, Brown said he believed that Kubrick was a chess master and that Burton beat Kubrick once and just felt like it was a major triumph because Kubrick was so hard to beat. But anyway, though, so then they start the training montage,
Right,
and
there you go.
With Vince DiCola, they have two Vince DiCola songs back to back. First, it's the song training montage, and which is a very dark, intense, song, and you see that Rocky's doing all this primitive stuff out in the snow.
Right.
This time it's not the streets of Philadelphia. This time there's 10 feet of snow or whatever on the ground.
Right.
It's actually filmed in Wyoming, by the way. That scene was. But anyway, so he does all the training stuff, and then at the end, of course, to make it work, he has to get Adrian's approval.
Right.
So Adrian comes in riding in on her white horse.
And her white coat.
Yeah, and then so we see that he has her support. So now he can fully do it. And
now
so,
it's more, more
and
intense.
so now it's a repeat of the Rocky II formula where,
Right.
finally when he sees that he has her full support, that's when he really gets into it. And it's also like in Rocky II, you have two training songs back to back. First the dark one, then the bright one. Whereas in
Right.
Rocky II, you have Going the Distance, then you see him with his son, and then it goes into Gonna Fly. Now you have the song training montage. Then Adrian shows up, and then you go into Hearts on Fire, which is a Vince DiCola song with vocals by John Cafferty.
And that's who I love the difference. He's doing all the primitive stuff.
Yeah.
And Drago has all the high tech everything.
Yeah.
And one interesting thing too is where, again, Adrian, she comes out to be supportive. I mean, she's still very worried about him. There's that deep relationship, and yet through all that thing, Ludmilla is still, just seems to be just overwhelmed with the magnificence of her husband's body.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, that seems to be the only, it was very superficial to me.
Oh yeah, but this is one of those movies. I recently saw the Siskel and Ebert review of the first Rocky, and Ebert thought it was awesome. Siskel was kind of lukewarm about it. He said he liked it, but he didn't love it. He said he thought his criticism was he found the characters of Adrian and Paulie not to be believable, which I disagree, by the way.
Right.
I think they're both very believable, but then Ebert, what perplexed me is that Ebert didn't dispute that. He said, well, this movie is just meant to hit you on an emotional level, which is true, but I still found the characters to be believable. But anyway, though...
well, and I'm saying I think that does happen.
Oh, yeah, I
people
think...
end up in relationships that are based on something a little more superficial, or it looks that way.
And I mean, Rocky and Adrian, they do love each other, but there is that awe that Adrian does have, and I think that there's part of her is like, I'm this shy girl who worked at a pet store with an alcoholic brother. How can I be married to the heavyweight champion of the world,
Yeah, and again, but they have something deeper than Drago and his wife, where she's just, like I said, just overwhelmed by the magnificence of his appearance or something. She's always like, I don't want to say anything R-rated. But
oh, I understand.
That's where I am.
Yeah, she does have that awe, and I think it could be because of where she came from, and she's still overwhelmed that she's gone into this life of luxury, in celebrity,
Yeah, I'm talking about Drago's wife.
Oh, Drago. Okay, I got you. Yeah.
Where she's just, dripping.
Oh, I got you. Yeah.
Dripping with hormones.
Okay. But yeah.
So then you have like you said, they have the more intense training. Scenes, and I love the difference in the equipment, because you see Drago with all the expensive high tech equipment.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
And monitors and the whole thing, and then of course you see him getting the shot.
Oh yeah. The juxtaposition of the two is amazing. Just the whole back and forth thing, between. They do exercises that are similar, but Rocky's very primitive, Drago's high tech, and then this near the end you have Drago. You see it's implied that he's taking the steroids, and then he lifts that really heavy weight, and then you see Ludmilla clapping, in awe, but then at the end when Rocky climbs up the mountain, how can you outdo running up the steps. Well, like running up a high, steep mountain, and
Right.
and of course, when he's on his way up there, you see like those guys who are supposed to follow him. They get their car stuck in the snow. So there's that.
He's gotten away from them.
Yeah. So that sort of symbolizes some sort of victory. It's obviously gives some sort of emotional jolt to the audience.
Right.
And then finally when he climbs at the to the top of the mountain and yells Drago.
Right.
It's great. And of course crumbles the newspaper clipping in a repeat of the scenario from 2 where Apollo does that with the picture of Rocky
Right.
tucked in a mirror in both cases.
Right.
And maybe he's maybe Apollo at some point said, Stalin, when I was preparing for a second fight, I had that newspaper clipping of you tucked inside the mirror, so maybe that gave Rocky the idea. But so then and I just love the instrumental ending of Hearts on Fire. After the vocals fade out, the fanfaric ending of it, how emotional and uplifting it is. It just goes perfectly. With that run up the mountain, and then where Drago's running on the mountain simulator and he falls at the end, and so it just brilliant, one of my favorite musical moments of the series. It just went so perfectly
Right.
with the emotions of that scene. So then you hear Drago, the word Drago echoing,
Right.
there,
Then
and
you find yourself at the arena.
yep,
And there you are.
and then I enjoy the scene where Burt Young does not get a lot of good moments in 3 through 5, but I do like the moment where his soft side comes out, if
Right.
only for a moment, where I don't remember the exact words, but it's something like how you stick with me when other people would tell me to get lost.
Right. Oh, yeah. Now, even before that, it's like a lot. We're back to the psychology thing.
Yeah.
When they're in the locker room there,
Yeah.
and they're piping in the sound from the arena,
Yeah.
and it's supposed to be like intimidating. You hear everybody kind of getting excited, and they're getting excited for
Yeah.
their boxer.
Yeah.
So because they're kind of looking around, and they can hear it coming in, and Rocky's just so focused. It's like it's bothering everybody else.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But it is while they're walking from the locker room to the arena, and Paulie has that moment, and he tells Rocky, that if he could.
If I could be anybody, I would be you.
Yeah.
and,
Come later.
Yeah, and so anyway, and there's another thing I'd like to add. During the pre-fight, you see the Politburo and so it was the premier sit down,
Right.
and the guy that the premier bears a very striking resemblance to Gorbachev, minus
Right.
the birthmark on the head.
Right.
But it's interesting. This movie was released in November of 1985. Gorbachev assumed power in March of '85, only 8 months earlier. And usually, after a major studio movie's done, it takes somewhere in the neighborhood of a year before it's actually released.
Mm-hmm.
People don't understand how tough it is to put a feature-length
Right.
movie together. Of course, you understand. You put a short together, you know what a
Right,
what a task
absolutely.
that is. But anyway, though, my theory, and keep in mind that when you see the premiere of the Politburo, they're just sitting there by themselves. You never see them with any, like you never see like a shot of the whole arena with them sitting there in that corner or whatever.
Right.
So they were probably the only ones there that day, and they could have just done it in the studio. They didn't have to even have to do it in the same room. But my theory is that they threw that together quickly after Gorbachev came into power. Maybe it was a last minute thing. And it should be noted that the guy who plays the premier, even though he's not explicitly said to be Gorbachev, he has played Gorbachev in 3 other movies.
Well, if the resemblance is there, a lot of times politicians, political leaders, they have lookalikes who.
Oh, yeah, like for example, there's one guy, an actor, he died a few years ago. I don't remember his name, but he played in 2 different films. He played a character who was explicitly said to be Jerry Falwell, and then another one that was implied to be. They did bear a strong resemblance to each other. But anyway, though, with this guy, his most 3 years later, after Rocky IV, he was in The Naked Gun, and in the first scene you see a bunch of world leaders of America's enemies, and one of them was Gorbachev, and it was played by the same guy, except they actually did put the birthmark on his head. And in a humorous scene, when Leslie Nielsen comes in and starts cleaning the house, he grabs Gorbachev in the headlock, gets a napkin, and wipes off the birthmark and said, "I knew it." But
anyway, so what's interesting about that is, Rocky comes in there, but in their, I'm going to say in their own fashion.
Yeah.
When Drago came in, it was like the same kind of pomp and circumstance and whatever that Apollo's entrance was in the United States.
Yeah, and I knew. I remember when I saw it, I knew that was the Soviet national anthem, and because at the time I watched the WWF a lot, and they had a professional wrestler named Nicoli Volkov, and he would always, before every match, he would tell the PA announcer to ask the crowd to rise and respect his singing of the Soviet national anthem. And of course he would sing it, and then people would throw stuff in the ring at him, But yeah, that really was their national anthem, though.
Right, and so the thing is, that he came in, Drago entered with all that, with their version of all that glory and all that Apollo Creed entered.
Yeah, and
the fight they had. So
yeah. So I see the nationalism on both sides. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
And I did get a kick out of it when they introduced Rocky, and of course he was booed when he walked in, and then the PA announcer mentions him, introduces him, and I got a kick out of that one guy at the Politburo, discreetly whistling, as if you see there's actually one guy who likes Rocky. Did you? Okay, just one of those little things.
One of those little things.
So anyway, because this is a Rocky sequel, he's going to get pummeled at the beginning.
Right.
Which leads to one of the commentators. Oh, by the way, speaking of which, I got a kick out of the fact that this is on the USA Network. Mm-hmm. Because had this fight taken place in real life, if you had an American who was heavyweight champion fighting a Soviet who had killed a former American heavyweight champion, the major networks would have been fighting over it, and it would have been a Super Bowl type attraction.
Yeah.
So it's funny to see it on the USA Network.
Yeah, and this, no, it was interesting. It's almost like, I want to say in a way it was like the U.S. was washing their hands of it, because maybe they were afraid it was going to end up with Rocky's death. I mean, we were talking about that before, and they didn't want to look like that was something they were promoting, and certainly if Drago won again, they didn't want to publicize it.
No, they wouldn't have. But of course, if Rocky had won, of course, it would have been, Well,
absolutely. But since Drago had already won once, and they'd been humiliated once, they certainly didn't want to be humiliated on a major network.
No, they didn't. But at the same time, everybody would be, wanting for Rocky to, beat the guy in the worst way.
Absolutely.
And so anyway, of course Rocky gets killed in the first round, and
best line in the movie.
Yeah.
I see 3 of them out there. Hit the one in the middle.
Yes.
Paulie tells him, hit the one in the middle, and even Duke says, "Yeah, hit the one in the middle."
Yeah,
there's just that line. I love it.
And I loved the interaction between the two. How Paulie said it in a cartoonish type way, typical of him in parts 3 through 5. But then Duke took it and made it something serious. He said it with passion. Hit the one in the middle.
Yeah.
And that actually was based on something that really happened in a fight in the 20s or 30s between Max Schmeling, the German, and then his opponent. I don't remember who his opponent was, but he said, referring to Schmeling, "I see 3 of them," and then the guy's manager said, "Hit the one in the middle." So that was actually part of Stallone's
knowledge
honor
of boxing.
Yeah.
Too.
So, but he made it fit the characters too. So I mean, he didn't just, it wasn't forced. It was something that fit very naturally to the characters. So then the second round comes, and then one of my favorite moments of the whole film is where he cuts Drago for the first time.
Right, and that's an interesting thing, because what happens with this fight is that, one, it's obvious Drago's never been cut before.
Yeah.
Like, he's never been injured, and he's also never been taken the distance.
Right.
So you've got that plan.
And one thing that we forgot to mention, but after the match with Apollo, I think one thing that was really interesting, that it's a minor detail to a lot of people, but I think it really was powerful, is how the PA announcer just says, "Your winner, Ivan Drago." I mean, there's no fanfare by it. It's very matter of fact. It's like the PA announcer knows something's wrong, so he doesn't make any kind of fanfare about it. But then when Drago gives that speech, and then that's where there's some confusion. How much English does this guy really know? Because gives a fairly, articulate speech, and then finally ends by saying, if he dies, he dies.
Right.
And that, obviously, that would make him, even more hated than just by killing, Apollo,
Right.
But, it's, and I think, but again, obviously, this is a movie really that appeals to the emotions, and, but,
What happened? What? Again, I just want to make sure to touch on all these little points because of the opposite thing, or what happened. Like I said, there's a lot of opposites going on. What's happening in the corners?
Yeah.
Where after Rocky cuts him, and Duke is telling him, "You see, you heard him.
Yeah.
He's not a machine. He's a man."
Yeah, I love that line. Yeah.
And then you go over into the other corner, and they're mad at Drago because he's not doing what he's told. They said, and he said he's not human. He's like a piece of iron.
Yeah.
So you've got these diametrically kind of opposite.
Oh yeah.
Parallel, or whatever.
Yeah, it's really good, and I love the moment when you see Drago's cut and the commentator. It's one of the best moments of all the boxing commentary of the series. Because I just shortly before that, you hear that line, they might have to stop this one before somebody gets killed.
Mm-hmm.
But now they say that he's cut and it's a bad cut, and then that's when that's one of Duke's best moments where he's really getting into it. He said he's not a machine, he's not invincible, he's a man.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you have the collage over the next few rounds, and then of course obviously forgot to mention, maybe it was too obvious, but one of the most iconic lines in movie history when they're about to start the fight and you hear, "I must thank you," and that was obviously and I think because Drago spoke so little in the movie, that made that line stand out even more.
Right, I think so.
And so then it goes on, and what did you think about the crowd slowly starting to cheer for Rocky?
It's interesting because I think that, how am I going to put this? I think when you have any crowd,
Mm-hmm.
it's and especially in this situation, I was going to say it wasn't always so cut and dry for me that everybody was there simply supporting Drago.
Right.
There were probably people there who liked boxing, who were probably interested. They certainly wouldn't have voiced that they would have supported Rocky openly at the beginning.
Right.
But, once it started and they were seeing what was going on, so you have that, and then maybe that sways other people. I think so I do think that's a possibility.
Yeah, that's good psychology there, yeah. And, after a few people are doing it, more people feel comfortable,
Mm-hmm.
Jumping on the bandwagon. And, but, it's, I do enjoy, it was humorous, but, when you would occasionally see the shots back to the Politburo in the premiere, and the way they just looked at each other, especially when they started hearing the Rocky, Rocky, and
then it's through all that too that you end up finding out that Drago's got some humanity, some humanness, or I don't know what to call it.
Yeah.
Because it's when he's saying he fights for him, he doesn't fight for you, and you're starting to see, and a lot of it, because he's experiencing things like I said that he hadn't before.
Yeah.
But you're seeing maybe. Being beaten up is bringing up what was a passion originally.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That he got into boxing probably because it was a passion. He loved it. It's what he wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
But once the state got a hold of him, and made it about them or about nationalism or whatever, it takes that away.
Right.
And you see that a lot when you see. Russian ballet dancers, or when they've defected, and they'll kind of say that the way it was handled, they lost their original passion.
Of course, yeah.
And so now you were seeing some of that creep up.
Yeah, and of course, and you see the one guy from the Politburo. After you could see from their body language they're disgusted by the people cheering for Rocky, and then one of them walks over to his trainer and he starts saying, "You trained this fool. He's a disgrace." And then he turns to Drago and says in Russian, "Listen to them, our people cheer for him." And then he slaps him in the head and says, "Win." And personally, I wouldn't slap,
No.
I wouldn't slap Drago in the head.
Well, he's used to having that kind of control over him.
Oh, yeah.
And, and that's the interesting thing, because that's another thing that breaks there.
Yeah.
That control that he's always had.
Oh, right, yeah.
You know, nod, do this, and Drago obeys. Now all of a sudden, he doesn't have that control anymore because, you know, Drago picks him up and...
Yeah, and then I love how Ludmilla yells, "Yet."
Yeah.
And then he drops the guy in the crowd. He drops the guy in the crowd, and then Drago yells out at the crowd in Russian, "I fight to win, for me, for me."
Right.
And to me, it seems like you interpret it the way I do. That it's like, who cares about, you know, because the guy from the Politburo was yelling at Drago about the Russians cheering for Rocky, and you know, I think Drago was saying, you know, I don't fight to win for my country, I fight to win for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, then they they touch gloves for the last round, and then then Drago speaks his last line of the film, which is "to the end." And how do you interpret that?
I looked at it again as one of those things where this was, again, the first time he was going all the way to the last round.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I thought it had something to do with that.
Okay. Well, you know, one thing that I think that was, you know, obviously there were some, you know, Hollywood exaggerations, you know, in this movie, but I think one thing that was very realistic, and you see this in all sports, when you have someone who's never been tested before, and when they, you know, get behind for the first time or get in trouble for the first time, they don't know how to get out of it. Even if maybe if they had been in tougher situations before, they would be able to.
Right, and like I said, he'd never been there, and
Yeah.
he'd been trained to be overconfident in that too. I mean, that happens if you never lose.
Of course it does, yeah.
The other thing is that, and he wasn't used to being injured.
Yeah,
and there's one minor little thing, and I know I'm going to get some people arguing with me about this, and I guess this is somewhat debatable, but what I learned is that when you've been getting steroids to build you up,
yeah,
there's something that happens if you actually do get injured that you could start breaking down a little faster.
Okay.
The steroids do something. So if they even knew this or not, so, you know, it was taking its toll.
Oh, right, yeah. And, you know, so anyway, you go to the, you know, of course, you know, this kind of script not only demands that Rocky wins in the end, and gee, by the way, I forgot to warn people that we're going to reveal the ending, but you know, if you don't figure out that Rocky's going to win in the end, then, you know, there's not much hope for you, because this is a film where, you know, Rocky, you know, winning, the script not only demands that Rocky wins, but that he wins in dramatic fashion in the last round, and,
right,
which is of course what happens.
Well, in the Soviet Union, he wasn't going to win the decision, so
right.
So that was, yeah.
So, and of course, I like how when he's finally winning at the end, you see like Duke and Paulie, who are such opposites, that they're like, you know, grabbing onto each other in excitement.
Right.
And because you don't see Duke smile very often during the series, and that, you know, but it's that he and Paulie are finally, you know, completely in sync with each other, and then you see Rocky Jr. and his friends back home, and even the robot who are getting into it.
Right. And something else, we talk about somebody who is experiencing something different, is Drago's wife has never had to see him get pummeled either.
Right.
So all of a sudden, you know, you're seeing what appears to be this surface relationship. You see that she's actually got some concern.
Yeah, and so finally, you know, Rocky gets the dramatic knockdown, and, you know, he wins, and then he gives gives his very simplistic, you know, but sincere speech about world peace, and but you know, I was thinking though, if anything like that ever did happen, I mean, if and we'll get into more to this in the Rocky V commentary, because it carries over into the next movie. But I mean, basically, had something like this happen in real life, you know, Rocky could have come back to America and run for president, you know, and probably won, because he would be people would symbolically view him as having knocked out the evil empire, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And so, you know, and of course, this is a time when I remember going to bed when I was about that age, afraid of nuclear war, you know, and a lot of people of my generations did. It was only a couple of years after that TV movie, The Day After, and there was, I remember seeing all kinds of documentaries on TV about a nuclear war, or what a nuclear war would be like, and
Yeah.
so
And this is something you learn, is that, everybody over there was having the same fears.
of course, yeah, and there's, I remember, there was one speech by Kennedy, John, not Robert, but where I don't remember the exact words, but it's something like we breathe the same air, we drink the same water, and we're all mortal. And so anyway, Rocky, obviously you don't expect anything Shakespearean from him, but but what you expect and what you get is always from the heart.
Absolutely.
And so then he gives a speech on world peace, and then he says, and appropriately, especially in light of what happens in 5 and 6, he ends by, he's giving a message to his son, and then you see his son end by saying, "I love you," and
Right.
so everybody can go home happy. and
Why not?
It's one of those things that I remember, and to me this sums up the what I'm about to say next sums up the movie. I don't consider this to be my favorite of the Rockies, but to me, I say this. I think the Rocky movies that I consider to be great movies are 1, 3, and 6. I consider Rocky 4 to be a very good movie, but I consider it to be fantastic entertainment. And Roger Ebert he said something years ago that I use as a litmus test, and I don't certainly agree with. I had plenty of strong, emphatic disagreements with what he said about certain movies, and that's a lot of agreements as well. But he said that he attempts to judge movies based on how well they do what they attempt to do. This is the thinnest Rocky movie, as far as plot and character development, but the movie succeeded spectacularly at what it attempted to do, and that's why it works for me. And that's why, that's why it works for. It was the highest grossing of all. It didn't get the critical accolades that the first did, but it made the most money.
Yeah, and in my case, and maybe it has come across, that psychologically I see things or read in things in the characters that a lot of people, including the critics, didn't see.
Yeah.
So that's why for me maybe I have it on a more favorite level than some people would. But it's because I'll pick up something that my dad jokingly says that even Stallone, when he wrote it, didn't intend.
That could be, and of course that's the beauty of film. There's always things you can get out of it, even if it's not what someone else intends.
Right.
And it can still have special meaning to you. And there are like moments in Rocky 5, by far the most bashed movie of the series, that really resonates strongly with me. And and there are moments. There are psychological things that I know that we found out we agree on, and there are things that you've brought up to me that I never thought about. But then I see your point after you mention that, and oh, no problem. And so I know that we have the same perspective on a lot of things, but nobody thinks exactly alike.
No.
So I'm glad to have that second opinion.
If two people have the exact same opinion, one of them isn't necessary.
Right, exactly. So we obviously we see a lot of the same things, and you see a few different things as well, but which is good. And this is what sums up why this is all the evidence you need that Rocky 4 was succeeded at what it attempted to. Like I said, I saw it at the Ohio Theater in Madison a few days before Christmas in 1985, and I remember, and it was pretty much a packed house. It was very close to capacity. And when Drago goes down, and all the movies, I've attended dozens of movies in person at theaters, and I've never seen any reaction anywhere close to this, but when Drago went down, the whole place cheered as if it were a real sporting event. And, to me, the biggest compliment that you can give to a filmmaker is when, you can, for a moment, make the audience believe something is real.
Absolutely.
Because everything you see on there, it's just make-believe. But if you could just put it in somebody's mind to create an emotional reaction as if it's real, you've done your job. And this movie, it doesn't have the deep plot, it doesn't have the deep character development that the others do, but it really works on an emotional level. And had it come out in another era, it would have worked nowhere near as well. But like I said, Stallone took the trends of the day, both socially and the trends of the movie industry, and masterfully put the Rocky story into that context, and did a great job with it, and created something that just really provoked a very strong emotional reaction, and gave what he describes as emotional payback. So and so in the end, once people start cheering as if it's a real sporting match, nobody's going to get hung up on any of the things that were a little bit corny, or that weren't as developed as they could have been.
You've said everything.
Well, thanks. Well, one other thing I want to add, though, is that I just found out the other day, because I mentioned that scene that was deleted that we saw a clip of in the trailer. Stallone's original cut was an hour longer than the theatrical cut. And now that so much time has passed, I would love to see a director's cut.
Okay, so Stallone, if you're watching,
yeah. And and of course the thing is, I know that you're a fan of the movie The Outsiders, which I've seen. I've never seen it in its entirety. I've seen parts of it. I've liked what I've seen.
They finally did the director's cut.
Yeah, I know.
It's much better.
Yeah, and I know they restored a lot of the book.
Right. It's worth a watch. Maybe we'll do that movie sometime.
Yeah, I'll have to go see it from beginning to end. But my daughter is in 6th grade. She's actually reading the book now.
So yeah.
And yeah, but like one thing I remember, because I had seen the part at the end where it goes from, where the way it just skips over the end after Dally gets killed, or you go to, or it cuts over all the stuff that happens in between. Right. And I hear they've restored that.
They've restored that.
That's good. Yeah.
So like I said, we'll
Okay.
analyze that sometime.
Okay. Yeah, and of course directed by Talia Shire's brother, Francis Ford Coppola.
There you go.
So there is a Rocky connection there.
We got it in.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, so hopefully, and I'd like to see him do director's cuts, because I know that I've seen one deleted. I know there are several deleted scenes from Rocky V as well.
And from Rocky Balboa, I've seen those. They're
Yeah.
on the disc.
Of course, some of those were expendable, but there's. But,
well, sometimes you make them to be expendable because they're going to tell you to cut something, so you might as well have it planned.
So it's interesting that the new Creed movie, according to IMDb, is only 95 minutes. So
We'll see what happens.
But anyway, though, wow, what a great episode. And wow, this is 16 minutes. Our commentary, our super deep analysis has been really super deep, because this is 16 minutes longer than the movie that we're super deep analyzing.
Oh,
so.
dear. Okay.
But that's a compliment to the movie, though. So when you could say more about it, I mean, can you imagine us trying to do an hour and 47 minute super deep movie analysis on Revenge of the Cheerleaders?
Oh, dear.
All right. So anyway, we will be back in probably next week with Rocky V, and then with Rocky Balboa the week after that. And we're also going to do a special thing on the Creed trailer as well, a little supplemental episode, and then probably The Outsiders, sometime later on, and then of course the movie Creed itself in a few months. And I've got a few others I have planned in between. So anyway, any last words before we sign off?
No.
Okay.
Take us away.
Well, as always, thank you so much for joining us. Feel free to share this video. Feel free to like Super Deep Movie Analysis on Facebook. And cordially invite you to join us again next week for Rocky V. Till then, for Super Deep Movie Analysis, this is Lec Zorn and Michelle Gussow. Good night.